it's only a matter of time until China is the largest economy in the world, the richest country, and the worldwide hegemon. And while that may all come true eventually, the reality is that China seems to be following a path similar to Japan as opposed to the United States. The world once believed that Japan was destined to do what China is seeking to do today, but it all fell apart as the entire country fell into a 30-year-long economic disaster that started with a real estate bubble. Well, it's my belief, and it's Kathy Wood's belief as well, that China has already crashed, that this disaster has already started, and that it's just a matter of time until the world realizes what is really going on. Today, I'm going to show you my deep dive into the reality that is the Chinese economy and the reasons why its collapse has already begun. But first, leave a like and a comment to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like private live streams, extra videos, and buy and sell alerts in my own personal portfolio. So if we are to understand why China's collapse has already started, we first need to understand how China rose to where it is today in the first place. Now, if we go back almost a century, China was in the exact same position as pretty much any undeveloped country. It had a large population but no capital, few cities, and an agrarian-based economy. But of course, it sought to be rich and powerful. So, under Deng Xiaoping, it allowed market forces to take hold, and it became somewhat capitalist. The state allowed business to thrive, to create wealth, and build infrastructure, and drag its billion citizens out of poverty. But capitalism was targeted, it was specific, it was overseen by the Chinese Communist Party, and a big part of the progress made was built around infrastructure and property. Now, bridges, roads, and railways have always been seen as good investments because they allow people to connect, commerce to take place, and markets to thrive. And the same can be said for building cities. They allow people to gather, to build businesses and create wealth, and a big part of creating cities is creating housing. The only problem with the Chinese way of doing things is that they've basically gotten addicted to building housing. They build a ridiculous number of apartments and put the rest of the world to shame every single year. Now, part of this is because there are just so many people in China, and every year millions more emigrate from the rural areas into the big cities. These people need places to live, and as with most people, they'd like to own the place they live. The problem is that in China, housing is so much more than a place to live. It's an investment, an asset, and even a retirement plan. You see, in China, despite what the CCP would have you believe, civil liberties are not widespread, and even the most innocuous things are heavily limited by the Communist Party. It's very difficult to invest in companies, in stocks or shares, or even ETFs or funds. In every other country in the world, when someone has some money they want to put away for a rainy day, they buy a share of a company. That company pays them a dividend, giving them some nice income, and it might even get more valuable over time as well if you play your cards right. But this just isn't possible for the vast majority of people in China. And they can't buy into alternative assets like crypto either because, again, the markets are heavily regulated and it's practically illegal to own anything that could possibly be considered a cryptocurrency. It's almost practically impossible for regular people to even own US dollars, as the CCP is so intent on keeping their populace under control. So where do the Chinese put their money? Where do they store their retirement funds? Where do they invest? The answer is, of course, in property. In China, you save your money until you have enough to buy your first apartment. But if you live in a big city like Shenzhen, then you probably can't afford the place you live in. So instead, you buy somewhere further from the coast. A new city that hasn't quite grown into the economic powerhouse that it one day might become. If you're a guy, well, there's a shortage of women in China thanks to the one-child policy. So finding a girlfriend or a wife is difficult, and unless you have a couple of apartments in your name, it might not happen at all. So you don't just buy one home, you buy two or three. And then you see how well the housing market in China has been performing, so you're convinced to buy even more. It makes perfect sense when you look at property prices in the past. Why wouldn't you throw everything you have into an investment that is guaranteed to double your money in 5 years? Because house prices only go up, right? But you're not the only one buying apartments like this. In fact, almost everyone is. Over 70% of household savings in China are in the form of property, which is 300 or 400% higher than most other countries. And with demand for homes so ridiculously high, property developers in China started to build apartments in less than desirable places. Places where no one actually lives, and I really mean no one. Developers have been building ghost cities, entire concrete jungles that are not meant to be lived in. They're not meant to house business or offices either. They're simply meant to be sold to someone who can't afford to buy a house in their own city. And what would a developer bother fitting these brand new apartment blocks with luxuries like elevators or staircases, running water or electricity if no one is going to live there? Well, they wouldn't bother, would they? So they don't. These buildings are often literally concrete shells where even the people who own the apartments aren't physically able to live in them, even if they wanted to. These ridiculous practices have led to China basically being the most expensive place in the world to buy a home, even compared to other super expensive cities like New York or Paris. Chinese cities are in a whole other world. In cities like Shenzhen, Beijing and Shanghai, property prices are higher than anywhere else in the world. In a normal mid-sized city in the United States or somewhere like the UK, you'd expect a home to cost on average 4 or 5 times the average salary. If the average salary is $50,000, a home would cost maybe $250,000. In a big city, a very desirable one, a place like New York, then that home is obviously going to cost a lot more. The home might cost around 10 or 15 times the average salary, meaning if the average salary were the same, the home would be about $750,000. In Hong Kong, the ratio between home prices and salaries is 45. In Shenzhen, it's 43, and in Beijing, it's 42. If the average salary were $50,000, a home might be $700,000 in New York, but over $2 million in China. In some cities like Tianjin, real estate per square foot is more expensive than London, despite the fact that people earn far, far less than they do over here. The property industry in China is the world's largest bubble. Today, it's worth more than $60 or $70 trillion, twice the size of the US housing market and far, far larger than any other Western country like the UK or Australia. The property sector alone accounts for almost 30% of China's GDP, and up until very recently, it was still growing.
We're looking at China today, much like we were looking at Japan in 1989. So in 1989, Japan was at the peak of its real estate and the world largely thought, oh, there's no stopping Japan. And Japan's going to become the largest economy in the world. And of course that didn't happen. Japan's boom, real estate boom, was destined to unravel. I'm sure many of you have heard the story where the emperor's palace in Tokyo, that piece of land, was worth more than the real estate in the entire state of California. Which also had seen nice real estate inflation. So that was destined to fail, and the Nikkei has yet to get back to that 40,000 level. So that's 30 years. 30 years later, 2 years later. So China, what's the analogy here? Well, China's real estate has been very, very important in terms of propelling its economy forward. It was part of the infrastructure build-out. They needed it. But it also became the most important part of consumer savings. By some estimates, 75% of all consumer savings in China is in real estate. Now, China's cracking down on real estate.